Hello, my name is Leonard, and this is the Symantec Enterprise Vault 10 for Exchange, lesson number 3, Administering Enterprise Vault. And where we are in the particular lessons is we've completed the installation, which is an e-learning course. We have gone through and used the configuration wizard to do the initial configuration tasks, and now we're ready to continue on with additional administrative tasks that you would normally perform after completing the configuration wizard. So we're going to go through and look at the way that we're going to access these tasks through the Enterprise Vault Administration Console, as well as how to set up roles-based administration. Because at this particular point in time, you would want to try to get away from using the Vault service account for everything and to be able to use specific administrators to do specific tasks within your Enterprise Vault environment. So we'll look at how to set that up. And then there's also some initial configuration settings that you may want to consider or look at prior to continuing on with the process of setting up Enterprise Vault mailbox archiving. So we'll look at a few of those settings as well. First is using the Enterprise Vault Administration Console. When we look at the Enterprise Vault Administration Console, it's set up as a Microsoft Management Console. So on the left-hand side, you have a tree hierarchical view of the particular files, and on the right-hand side, you see the individual details. So I can expand and see which items I have on the left, and then I can go to the right-hand side and get additional information and or the property pages for those particular items. The main things that we'll be looking at here over the next few lessons include the directory, the Enterprise Vault site, as well as the targets and policies. We also have the Enterprise Vault servers, and then they've expanded that section out to show you the Enterprise Vault server itself, which in our example is evserver.example.com. And then we have a section that shows us the services and tasks. Then we get into the archives nodes, the Vault storage groups, which we'll be getting into in a later lesson, the indexing section, which is also covered in a later lesson. Then we get into the personal store management section. Again, that's also in a later lesson. And then we have the Enterprise Vault Online, which is to help us with topics that we may be confused with, and we'll look at that here in a moment. And then in this particular example that they show you on the screen, as a Microsoft Management Console, we have added an additional Microsoft Management Console snap-in, the Computer Management Console. So that's just to kind of show you again that it's just a regular Microsoft Management Console, that you can add additional ones in with it. You can use it in additional groupings based upon what you would like to have saved as your administrative tool set, if you will. You typically are going to be logging in, or actually required to log into the Enterprise Vault server using the Enterprise Vault service account that you specified as part of the configuration. And that because that account is the one that's going to be used for assigning the Enterprise Vault administration roles. First thing I want to look at was all the way down to the bottom on our Enterprise Vault administration console, and that was the Enterprise Vault Online section. The Enterprise Vault Online section, when you select that, opens up and gives you several different things that you can use to get additional information about configuration and using Enterprise Vault. First one we have is the Symantec Connect. This provides you with links to the Enterprise Vault discussion forums, articles, videos, blogs, and gives you the opportunity to provide feedback. We have a link to the compatibility charts. Again, the hardware and software compatibility is always changing, so you want to make sure that you're looking at and using the most recent version of the compatibility charts. Product information, this gives you access to the Enterprise Vault white papers, data sheets, articles, podcasts, and so on. About the actual product itself. We have the Enterprise Vault support, which gives you access to a comprehensive knowledge base and other Enterprise Vault support options. We have the My Support online service portal, which gives you a means to submit and manage Enterprise Vault support cases. We have the email bulletin service, which is a technical support bulletins about the product, updates, and changes. You can have those automatically sent to you. The documentation feedback section gives you the option of providing feedback associated with the current documentation, such as the installing configuring guide, introduction and planning guide, and so on. We have the Symantec Global Services, which gives you access to expert resources for deploying, managing, and supporting your Symantec products. We have a Find a Symantec Partner option, which gives you help in finding resources for you within your local region that can help you out with your Enterprise Vault environment. And then finally, we have our Doing Business with Symantec, which is a way to find answers to common questions on doing business with Symantec, as well as additional information and contacts. So all of this was brought up from clicking on the Enterprise Vault Online button at the bottom of the Enterprise Vault Administration Console hierarchy. Next is the Accessing Enterprise Vault Documentation Help. You can go to the Help option in the Enterprise Vault Administration Console and then select Help on Enterprise Vault. And this is a typical Windows help file system. You can have the contents and you can select different documents, and you can either look at the help file or a PDF, Adobe Acrobat type of a file format for your help. It has the capability of searching based upon the index, or you can also save your favorites there. So it's a typical Windows help system. And you can see here it's got a list of the common documentation that you'll be working with in Enterprise Vault, such as a couple we've already mentioned, such as the Installing and Configuring Guide, the Administrator's Guide, and of course a very important guide here, the Setting Up the Exchange Archiving Guide, and the Help System. So again, this is just to show you if you need additional assistance or additional information, you can start here in the Help file system. And I will be, throughout the different lessons in this particular course, alluding back to this help system to get additional information beyond what is being covered in the course itself. So let's go ahead and start off with configuring these administrative services that we talked about that you may want to do immediately following the running of the configuration wizard. And the first thing we want to look at is the concept of roles-based administration. And in roles-based administration, we have our Vault Service account. We specified this Vault Service account and its password as part of the configuration wizard. That configuration wizard gave this particular account certain additional permissions or access to this machine. As one of the prerequisites for this account, we added them to the local administrators group on the particular Windows server that you were installing Enterprise Vault. So this particular account, by default, has access to everything inside of your Enterprise Vault Administration Console, and it has access to all the objects through their access control lists that exist inside of that Enterprise Vault environment. So what we want to do is, instead of using this service account, and again from a security standpoint, it's bad practice to be using a service account to log in and do regular day in and day out administrative types of tasks. So what we want to do is, once we've logged in, we want to create users and or groups that are going to perform the necessary administrative tasks for us in our Enterprise Vault environment. And we're going to accomplish this through our roles-based administration. And you'll see this abbreviated RBA. Now, with the roles-based administration, the idea here is that to try to help you manage which administrators perform which tasks, we've kind of associated a role with a job. So if a particular person is responsible for maintaining all the file servers, they may need a file server administrator's role. If a particular person is responsible for SharePoint, they should probably get a SharePoint administrator's role. And what we've tried to do is, we'll see here in a moment, that we have created some of these roles in advance that give you the capability of performing what we would consider a typical exchange or messaging administrator would wish to do. So therefore, by assigning either a user or a group to that role, they will automatically get a collection of permissions to allow them to do what we think they would do as part of that particular job. Now, we're going to go through and look at some of the predefined roles that come with Enterprise Vault. These include a messaging administrator. These are going to be people that typically perform day-to-day tasks either on Exchange or Lotus Domino. They will not have access to file servers. They will not have access to SharePoint because they're a messaging server. So you can see as we go down the list here, they're basically being defined by what you're responsible for managing. We have a file server administrator, a PST administrator, a SharePoint administrator. If you're responsible for managing the storage services, we have a storage administrator. And then we have a power administrator. Now the power administrator is like one step under the Enterprise Vault Service account. It can pretty much do everything that the Enterprise Vault Service account can do, except assign and create roles and permissions. So the idea here is that this would be, if you had somebody that needed to do day in and day out administrative tasks, we would probably add them to the power administrator type of a role. We have an administrator just for Exchange type of things, one for Domino types of things. If you are the Lotus Domino environment, comparison to PST would be NFS administrators. And then we have a new one, which wasn't in earlier versions of Enterprise Vault, which is the indexing administrator to help you administer and manage indexes. And we'll come back to the types of tasks that are necessary for that in a later lesson. And again, as a reminder here on this particular slide, that the Vault Service account is the only account that can administer these particular roles. Now, for more details, specifically which items that each one of these individual roles have to the Enterprise Vault Administration Console, please refer to the help file system to get those details. So we're using some terms when we work with roles-based administration. The first one is an operation. We show this as a little kind of a building block. We're going to take individual permissions, individual operations, and start grouping them together to make up a single operation. Then what we're going to do is we're going to take collections of these operations, maybe even with an individual permission, and group them all together into a task. Then what we're going to do is we're going to create this role, and this role is going to own a collection of tasks or operations or even other roles. So for example, I go through and define what types of tasks and operations you should be responsible for as a messaging administrator. Well, if you're going to be a power administrator, you're probably going to do everything that a messaging administrator might do. So therefore, instead of having to reassign those individual operations and tasks, we will just add the messaging administrator role to the power administrator role. So it automatically gets that particular role. And again, as we go through and set this up and configure it, you have the capability of specifying or creating custom roles if they don't already exist. And we're going to use something called the Windows Authorization Manager to maintain this, and we'll see that in just a moment. And that's going to store all of this information in something called a authorization store. This authorization store is a XML file type of an environment. And when you go through and you're assigning the users to the authorization store to be able to assign them to the individual roles, you're going to use lightweight directory access protocol queries. If you want to create users and roles that are unique to this application, but we'll also see that if you've already created users and groups in your Windows environment, that we can also use those in the authorization manager. So since we alluded to this authorization manager, first, how are we going to open it up? Well, you start off in the Enterprise Vault Administration Console up at the very top there where the directory is. So you're going to right-click on the directory, and if you have the correct permissions, which means you are the Vault Service account, you will be able to see the option for Authorization Manager. So you can see we've got a pop-up that is opened up here that at the title bar it tells you that it's the Authorization Manager. In the Authorization Manager, the one that we use for Enterprise Vault is named evazstore.xml. So again, this is the XML file where this information is being stored inside of. Now, if we want to create groups just for the EVAZ store, we would create them in that groups folder. But if we want to create groups for Enterprise Vault that are only available to Enterprise Vault, we would create them at the groups level under the Enterprise Vault folder. Now, you can go to the definition section. We don't really show the definition section, but the definition section gives you the capability of looking at each of those roles that we listed earlier and seeing which permissions have been assigned to those individual roles. So that's another way of getting more detail about what each one of the individual roles perform. We're more interested in the administrative tasks you would do as the person who's installing Enterprise Vault or logged in with the Vault Service account to be able to add additional administrators to your environment. So we're going to go to the role assignment section and we're going to add a messaging administrator. So I just select the roles assignment folder, I right-click on the messaging administrator, and I select assign users and groups. And you can see from the pop-up, once I've selected assign users and groups, I can either use Windows or Active Directory users and groups, or I can use ones that have been defined in the Authorization Manager. And again, those would have been created using lightweight directory access protocol queries and would only be accessible through the Authorization Manager. You wouldn't see them in Active Directory or anywhere else. Now, let's say that we've gone through and created this messaging administrator. Well, again, one of the things that these roles are going to do for us is control what we see inside of the Vault Administration Console. If I'm a messaging administrator, why should I see a file server target? I don't have access to it. I can't configure it. I can't do anything with it. So just show me the things I have access to. So this isn't an all-inclusive list of showing you everything that you have access to as a messaging administrator. Again, you use the help file system, or you can see that under the definitions in the Authorization Manager. But this is showing you for the example of targets. So as a messaging administrator, I have access to both Exchange and Domino targets. Well, if I had assigned myself maybe the Exchange administrator, I might only have access to the Exchange targets. But what if I did give you file server administrator role? What would I see then? Again, I've got a little snapshot of the Enterprise Vault Administration Console for targets as a file system administrator. Notice I don't see Exchange and Domino. The only thing I see are file server targets. So again, one of the things that this roles-based administration is doing for us is controlling access to the objects inside or what we see in the Enterprise Vault Administration Console. Well, like all good things, as we go through and start assigning these different roles, we may forget which particular role has been assigned to which particular user, and we have a particular user that's logged in and they can't figure out what role they've been assigned to, what permissions they have. Well, again, you can go through and look at that. I can go through and right-click on the directory, and notice here I've right-clicked on the directory and I do not see Authorization Manager. Why don't I see Authorization Manager as an option when I right-click on the directory? I'm not the Vault service account. I must be logged into someone else, and we'll see here in a moment that I am logged into somebody else. But being logged in as that particular person, I do have the right to be able to see what role has been assigned to me and what permissions I have. So if I click on the Show Roles, it'll open up a dialog box, and you can see in this example that I have actually logged on as a user other than the Vault service account. In our particular environment, we have assigned the Vault service account name as EV_service. So you'll see that in our particular environment. So this person is logged on as L. Waldron. You can see that they have been assigned the messaging administrator role, and you can see the individual entitlements. Now in this dialog box, they don't call it an operation, they don't call it a task, they call it an entitlement. But you can see as a messaging administrator, I can administer Enterprise Vault targets. I can administer Enterprise Vault archives. I can do Enterprise Vault policies. Now again, those would be the mailbox policies and desktop policies associated with Exchange or messaging, not the policies associated with SharePoint, because I'm not a SharePoint administrator. Now the other thing that we have also, though, is that as we put different types of objects inside of the Enterprise Vault Administration Console, these objects also have security built around them as well. So as I add a Enterprise Vault server, or I go through and I add a particular individual task or service, I can go through and look at those. And these will be assigned access control lists, just like Windows has access control lists as well. And it can limit what I actually see in the Enterprise Vault Administration Console, which is going to limit what I can administer. So this example here is looking at the properties of an Enterprise Vault server. So again, I would have navigated through the Enterprise Vault Administration Console, down to the Enterprise Vault servers node, expanded that up, went into my domain, and then I would have specified this particular individual server, right-clicked on it in the right-hand window and selected properties. And you can see I can go to the admin permissions, and in this particular example, I've added the domain administrators group, the enterprise administrators group, a group called IT, and the schema administrators to this particular user. And they're showing you that for this particular object server, that the schema administrators have denied access to administering this server. So if I'm a member of that group, I would not be able to administer this particular Enterprise Vault server. But you also notice on this dialog box that I have the option to click Add. When I click the option to add, I could go through and add people from the Active Directory, either a Windows individual user or a Windows group, and then I could assign them either grant or deny individual permissions. Now, moving on from administrative tasks. So the idea, again, from a sequencing standpoint, we've done the installation, we've run the Enterprise Vault Configuration Wizard, we've gone through and we've set up the correct security that we wish, and we've defined the different administrators that we wish to perform different administrative tasks. So now we would go through and say, okay, we're now ready to start doing that configuration we need to do right prior to setting up storage to do mailbox archiving. So I would log in as that particular user and start configuring some settings. What types of settings would you configure setting up? Well, first you need to make sure that you have the index locations defined. And in this particular lesson, we'll show you how to go through and create those index locations. In a later lesson that deals with indexing, we'll go through and talk about some considerations for selecting those particular index locations. We're also going to go through and create the Vault storage. And again, we have a separate lesson that's going to deal with setting up and configuring the Vault storage for us. And then we're going to define some default settings. We're going to go through and set up and look at the web access ports and security, which means are we going to use the secured sockets layer or SSL. We're also going to go through and decide whether or not we need to set up size limits on an archive. These are similar to mailbox archiving quotas in your Exchange environment. We're also going to select our indexing levels, but we'll get into the details of the indexing levels and setting those up in a later lesson, not this one. And then also retention categories. In a later lesson, it made more sense to discuss the retention categories there, so we'll show you how to create and set those up. And then the last thing we'll actually look at in this lesson for that initial configuration setup is going to be creating and assigning the server cache. So starting off with setting up the index storage locations, you navigate through your Enterprise Vault Administration Console from the directory to the Enterprise Vault site. You then go down to the Enterprise Vault Server section. You expand the individual server, which in this particular case is named EV Server. You then go to the Services node. And under the Services node, in order to set up the indexing locations, you will open up the properties associated with the Enterprise Vault indexing service. Once I open up those particular properties, I will then go to the Index Locations tab of the Enterprise Vault indexing service property dialog box, and then you will click Add. Now in this particular example, we've already clicked the Add button, so there's already been some added in a location on the D drive under a folder named EV Storage. Now when we clicked the Add button and went through the little section of dialog boxes for that and clicked OK, the system created the index folder, and then by default it will create 8 additional folders called Index 1 through Index 8. You can now configure whether or not you want by default to have 8 index locations. There's advantages and cons to doing that, and we'll discuss that in the indexing lesson in more detail. Also, you have the option of noticing that you could remove an index location. If you need to for some reason, take it out. Also, you have the option of selecting and placing the index locations in backup mode, and we have a later lesson. We'll go into the details about why you'd want to do that and the different ways of setting that up. But once you've got your index locations created, the next thing that we move on to, as far as in this dialogue or in this particular chapter, instead of going on and doing the Vault storage, which we'll talk about in the next lesson, we want to go through and look at some site properties. The first site property that we're going to look at, and again, our site name is EV Site, so you can look up at the title bar and see that this is, in fact, the Site Properties dialog box for our site, which is named EV Site 1. And we're on the General tab, and on the General tab, we're looking specifically at the section Web Access Application. By default, it will use the TCP port 80. Now, the idea here is that we're assuming that your Enterprise Vault environment is in your internal network, so it's on a safe network. So having it communicate in an unencrypted manner with the other Enterprise Vault servers, the SQL servers, and other servers that it needs to communicate with, it should be fine doing that over port 80. However, there is a little security warning there, and if you click on that security warning, there'll be a pop-up saying that Enterprise Vault communicating over port 80 will not, in fact, be encrypted and is not technically as secure as it could be. So you do have the option, if you wish, you can go ahead and select that you wish to use the Secured Sockets layer and use the HTTPS protocol, and the default port for that is 443, but do remember that it will take additional configuration to set that up. You will have to set up the certificates and everything you need to support the Secured Sockets layer protocol over port 443. Just as a reminder, if you do have or you are using some of the web access applications and you come in and change this setting after you've already archived things, some of the shortcuts in those web-based type of applications may not work correctly. So that's why, again, we're saying this may be something that you want to configure or know that you've configured or made a conscious decision to configure early in the setting up of Enterprise Vault archiving process. Another thing we said that you may want to configure early on is whether or not you wish to have a archiving usage limit. We're still on the Site Properties dialog box for EV Site 1. We've just changed tabs. We moved from the General tab to the Archive Usage Limit tab. And the first thing you notice is that there is a checkbox there for either enabling or disabling. So there's nothing that says you have to set up a limit on an archive size. If you do set up the archive size, you do have the option of being able to specify in megabytes how big you want that limit to be. Now, by default, you can also see here that we do have the option of setting up a notification to the user. We can send it when they approach the size limit or when they've actually exceeded the size limit. We can also specify properties on how often we want to send out that particular notification. Now, one of the issues that is occurring here is the fact that this is sending notification to the user. It's not sending notification to you, the administrator. So how are you going to find out if they have exceeded their quota limits? There are a couple different reports that you can run, and again, we have a separate lesson dealing with reports later on, but you can create one of the reports, either the usage per archive report or the usage by billing account, and we'll be discussing billing accounts a little bit later. Either one of those reports can show you more detail about how close or if a particular user has actually exceeded a size limit. Next thing we want to set up is our schedule. Again, we're still on the site schedule properties for site EV Site 1. We have changed tabs again. We've now moved over to the site schedule tab. When you are setting up a site schedule, this site schedule can be used for a variety of different types of tasks. And as we go through the various lessons, we'll talk about how you can use the site schedule. And on some of those tasks, you can set up custom schedules as well. But if you do decide to use the site schedule, you have the capability of having the site schedule never run. And you might want to use that during initial testing or when you're first setting up archiving until you've got everything in place to do that first initial archiving run. Or more commonly, once everything is set up and you're running your administrative day-to-day types of tasks, you'll have it run at selected times. Now, when you have it run at selected times, the highlighted blue in the little grid there are the times that you have selected for running. Now, you can set it up to display that particular area that you wish to select either in 1 hour or 15-minute increments. If you do set it up in 15-minute increments and come back later and change it to 1 hour increments, it will round off the increments to the nearest hour. If you come back again later and change it back to 15 minutes, it won't go back automatically to those original 15-minute settings. So again, the idea here is just to kind of decide that you wish to either do it in hour or 15-minute increments and leave that setting configured there. One of the last things that we said that we wanted to show you in this particular chapter as far as configuring as initial configuration item that we're not covering in a different chapter is the server-side cache. So we've opened a different property page. We've closed out the site property page that we've been looking at earlier. We've now opened the computer properties for the Enterprise Vault server named Server 2. We've gone to the cache tab. And on the cache tab, we want to specify two things. First is the location, and you want to specify the location for this. And again, we highly recommend that you don't have this on the operating system partition or spindle. We also recommend that you move it to a different location than where indexing is occurring. So there's some other considerations for this, and we'll discuss those in the individual lessons where it comes up. But this particular cache location is being used by several different applications or services within Enterprise Vault. For indexing, it's designed to be a temporary storage location for very large search results. So again, you can go to this particular location and you may never see anything in there because things go in there as a temporary location before they're sent somewhere else, for example, to Discovery or Compliance Accelerator, one of those search applications we talked about earlier. If you're using file server archiving, it's used as the target file server as a Solera file server for temporary storage of the information. If it is in fact, or you do in fact have Vault Cache configured, it's used as temporary storage for your content cache or your metadata cache, and we'll be talking about those in a later client lesson until you actually move or synchronize those items with the client itself. So therefore, the sizing of this, you need to keep an idea about, again, how many of these really big searches where you might be temporarily storing those large search returns, or how many people you have using Vault Cache. If you have a few number of people using Vault Cache, 20 gigabytes might be okay, and 20 gigabytes is the default size. But if you plan on having a large organization, 10,000, 15,000 users, and every one of them are going to be using Vault Cache, and you have a single or two or three maybe Enterprise Vault servers, you may want to consider increasing the size of that Vault Cache location. Also, as a reminder, this is one of the locations that we specify in our best practices documentation to exclude from antivirus checking. Because if you go through and start doing automatic or manual antivirus checking, and there are files in this temporary storage location, they may be modified by the virus checker file or virus checker application, which means they won't work when they need to for whatever application is trying to use them. So in this lesson, we looked at how to access and use the Enterprise Vault Administration Console. We also looked at the concept of roles-based administration and how to set that up in your Enterprise Vault Administration Console. We also looked at some of the initial configuration settings that you'd want to perform following running the configuration wizard, and we looked at the ones that aren't covered in a different lesson. For our reference materials, we're going to go through and look at the README first again. Also, don't forget to go to the Symantec support website. You can get additional information there. And then the information we covered in this lesson is also covered in the installing and configuring, introduction and planning guides, as well as the console help. So this brings us to the end of lesson number 3.